Zanele was the kind of woman you didn't forget after meeting her, not because of her size, but because of her spirit. She lived in Nairobi with her aging grandmother, Mama Thandi, in a humble yet cozy home filled with love, laughter, and the smell of freshly cooked ugali and sukuma wiki. Zanele was in her late 20s, plus size, and proud. She walked with confidence, even though life hadn't always been easy. She worked long shifts at a busy government hospital, where patients would light up at the sight of her. Everyone, from the janitor to the chief surgeon, respected her, not just because she was excellent at her job, but because she genuinely cared. She'd often use her lunch breaks to comfort crying children, or sneak some of her own money to help a patient who couldn't afford medicine. People in the neighborhood called her Daktari wa Watu, the people's nurse. She didn't dress fancy or post selfies, but her heart had a glow social media couldn't capture. When she walked into a room, her presence filled it. Her laughter, contagious. Her hugs, healing. Zanele wasn't just a nurse. She was the kind of person who would run in the rain to deliver medicine, skip her own meals for someone else's child, or stay an extra hour just to hold an old woman's hand. Back at home, she took care of Mama Thandi, like a queen. She cooked, cleaned, and made sure her grandmother never missed her evening tea or favorite soap opera. Even with all the responsibilities, Zanele never complained. She carried her world with grace, and while others were chasing fame and filters, Zanele chased purpose. Her dream was simple, to one day open a small clinic in her grandmother's name, a place where no one would be turned away for lack of money. She wasn't loud about her dreams. She didn't need to be. Her quiet strength spoke louder than any shout ever could. People often overlooked her because she didn't fit the image of modern beauty, but those who knew her knew she was gold, not the shiny kind, but the kind that stays even after the glitter fades. Zanele had been in a relationship with Bakari for nearly 4 years. To many people, they looked like the perfect couple. Bakari was tall, handsome, smooth with his words, and always dressed to impress. He had a charming smile and a way of talking that made people listen, but behind closed doors, things weren't as perfect as they seemed. Zanele loved him deeply. She believed in him when no one else did. Back when he was struggling to get his small logistics business off the ground, it was Zanele who gave him money from her savings. She helped him pay rent, bought him food, even designed his first business cards. When he was discouraged, she lifted him up. When he was tired, she reminded him of his dreams. She gave her all, her time, her energy, her love, without ever asking for much in return. In the beginning, Bakari seemed grateful. He would call her his ride or die and brag about her cooking, her loyalty, and how she stood by him when he had nothing. But as the business began to grow and he started making money, things slowly changed. Bakari became obsessed with appearances. What he wore, where he was seen, and who he was seen with. He started going to high-end events, spending more time with influencers and flashy friends. And little by little, he stopped inviting Zanele. He told her he was busy, that he had meetings, that she wouldn't fit in with his new crowd. He'd make small jokes about her weight, her clothes, her simple lifestyle, things he once claimed to love. Zanele noticed the distance growing between them, but she stayed silent. She thought maybe he was just stressed, maybe it was just a phase. She kept showing up for him, hoping he'd see that her love hadn't changed. But Bakari had started changing inside. He began comparing her to the women he met, slim, glamorous, always on social media. He'd scroll through his phone and sigh loudly, saying things like, "You know, some people really invest in their image." Zanele would smile through the pain, pretending not to notice, but deep down, it hurt. The man she loved was slowly slipping away, not because she had failed him, but because she no longer fit the image of success he wanted to project. Even with all the signs, Zanele held on, not because she was weak, but because when she loved with her whole heart. She remembered the Bakari who had dreams, who used to laugh with her in the kitchen, who once held her hand and promised forever. She hoped that version of him was still in there somewhere. But what she didn't know was that Bakari was already looking elsewhere, chasing something he thought looked better, forgetting the woman who helped him build everything he had. It all changed when Achieng walked into Bakari's life like a storm in high heels. She was everything the city buzzed about: slim, stylish, loud on Instagram, and always at the right parties. She had thousands of followers, a sleek weave that bounced with every step, and a voice that turned heads when she laughed. She walked like the world belonged to her and talked like she'd already conquered it. To someone like Bakari, who was now addicted to image and clout, Achieng was the ultimate prize. Their paths crossed at a business mixer. Bakari introduced himself, and Achieng gave him just enough attention to keep him wanting more. She didn't ask him about his values or his goals. She asked what car he drove, who designed his shoes, and what club he was hitting next. And just like that, Bakari was hooked. Achieng was the very image of the world he wanted to be accepted in. She didn't know Zanele, but from the moment she entered the picture, Zanele became invisible. Bakari's behavior changed fast. He started spending more time with Achieng, calling it business networking. He'd come home late, smelling of expensive perfume that wasn't Zanele's. When Zanele asked questions, he brushed her off, saying she was being insecure and too traditional. Then came the comparisons. At first, subtle. Achieng says people who care about their image go to the gym. Or, you should try something new with your hair. You know, keep things fresh. But then, it got cruel. One evening, as Zanele served him a hot meal after her long shift, Bakari looked at her and scoffed. "Do you ever think about changing your style? You dress like a mama from Shags." She laughed it off, but her heart broke. He called her old-fashioned, told her to modernize, and began mocking her weight. The same curves he used to love, he now saw as shameful. He'd scroll through Achieng's photos while sitting right next to Zanele, his eyes glued to the screen, his mind already gone. Zanele didn't recognize the man he was becoming. He was colder, sharper with his words, and obsessed with how others saw him. She tried harder, cooked his favorite meals, wore brighter clothes, even tried putting on makeup she didn't like. But it was never enough. Bakari wasn't chasing love anymore. He was chasing status. And in his eyes, Achieng was the golden ticket. The worst part? He didn't even hide it. He flaunted her online, shared pictures of their business meetings and late-night outings. People whispered. Zanele heard it all. Still, she said nothing. Not because she didn't care, but because she didn't want to break something she had built with so much love. She hoped he'd come back to his senses, remember who was with him when no one else was. But Bakari was too deep in the illusion, too lost in the light of Achieng's spotlight to see the quiet woman holding his heart. The night of the party was supposed to be a celebration, music, laughter, and good vibes among friends. Zanele wore her favorite kitenge dress, the one her grandmother helped her stitch, bright and full of life. She smiled through her nerves, knowing Bakari hadn't been talking much lately, but still hoping tonight would remind him of their journey. She brought a cake, handmade, decorated with care. She believed love could still be enough. The house was full, music thumping, and everyone dressed to impress. Bakari was already there, standing close to Achieng, who laughed at his jokes like she owned him. Zanele's heart sank, but she told herself to be strong. She greeted people with grace, forcing a smile. But when she reached Bakari, he looked at her like she was a stranger. "Oh, you made it," he said flatly, barely making eye contact. Then, without warning, he turned to the crowd and raised his voice. "Everyone, I have something to say," he began, holding a glass like he was giving a toast. Zanele stood behind him, confused. "I've been thinking a lot about my life, where I'm going, the image I want to present, and I've decided it's time to let go of what no longer fits that vision." There was a confused silence. "I need someone who matches my future, someone modern, sharp, stylish, not stuck in the past." People looked around awkwardly. Achieng smirked, and then he said it, right there in front of everyone. "Zanele, I think we should end things. You've been great, but you don't fit into the man I'm becoming." Gasps filled the room. The music stopped for a second. Zanele froze, like her heart had been yanked from her chest. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just looked at him, her eyes wide, her soul cracking quietly inside. Her hands trembled, but she held her head high. People waited for drama, for shouting, for her to break. But she didn't. She looked him in the eyes, nodded once and said, "I hope you find what you're looking for." Then she turned, heels clicking softly on the floor, and walked out, leaving behind her cake, her dignity intact, and the man who once promised her forever. Outside, the cool Nairobi air hit her like a wave. She finally let the tears fall, silent and warm. She sat on the curb, alone, remembering all the times she stood by him, the sleepless nights, the rent she paid, the food she cooked, the prayers she said, all of it, tossed aside like she was nothing. But even in that moment of heartbreak, Zanele didn't curse him. Deep down, she knew she had loved with a pure heart. That was her power. She had been loyal, kind, and real, and no cruel words or flashy woman could erase that. Inside the party, people started whispering. Some were shocked, some disgusted by Bakari's boldness, but none of it mattered anymore, because while Bakari chased a shiny future, Zanele was already starting to walk towards something greater, something he could never give her, self-worth that didn't need approval. And that quiet walk out of the party, it wasn't just an exit, it was the beginning of Zanele's rise. After the heartbreak, Zanele didn't let herself drown in pain. She went quiet, not bitter, just focused. While some people expected her to fall apart, she surprised them all. Every morning, she woke up before the sun, tied her hair back, and walked to the hospital with her head held high. Her smile returned slowly, not because she was happy, but because she was healing. She poured her energy into her work, treating patients with more care than ever before. The pain in her heart made her even softer toward others. She became known in the ward not just as a nurse, but as a woman of strength. Late at night, when others slept, she studied, her eyes red from reading, her mind full of medical terms and dreams bigger than her heartbreak. She applied for a scholarship to study advanced trauma care, not expecting much, yet she got it. That letter came in the middle of a rainy morning, and when she read it, she cried again. But this time, the tears were full of hope. Zanele packed her bags, kissed her grandmother goodbye, and went for her studies. She trained with some of the best doctors in the country. She listened, learned, and led. She didn't speak about Bakari or what he had done. When people asked if she had someone special, she just smiled and said, "Right now, I'm building something." When she returned to Nairobi, she didn't come back the same. She came back stronger, wiser, glowing from the inside. Her grandmother welcomed her with ululations and hugs, proud of the woman Zanele had become. With the little savings she had, and help from a few friends, Zanele opened a small clinic in her grandmother's name, Mama Wanza Clinic. It stood right in the middle of their neighborhood, painted in soft blues and greens, with benches for mothers, toys for children, and posters that said, "You matter." She didn't do it for money. She did it for the women who felt unseen, for the girls who felt not pretty enough, for the sick who couldn't afford care. Her clinic was love turned into action. And though people whispered stories of Bakari and how things had gone wrong, Zanele never joined in. She never insulted him, never clapped back, never posted shady quotes. Her silence was not weakness, it was grace. Each time she walked through the clinic's doors, her confidence grew. She stood tall, not because someone loved her, but because she had finally learned to love herself. The patients smiled brighter around her. Children hugged her legs. Old men called her Daktari wa Huruma, the doctor of compassion. Zanele's transformation wasn't loud. It didn't trend online, but it was powerful. She didn't seek revenge. She sought purpose, and she found it. Life turned quickly for Bakari, and not in the way he had imagined. After he dumped Zanele and started showing off with Achieng, he thought he had finally leveled up. He dressed in designer suits, posted every meal on Instagram, and talked about big moves with his business. People praised him, laughed at his jokes, and even called him boss. But behind the shiny clothes and loud parties, something dark was brewing. Bakari had trusted his business partner too much. The man was smooth-talking and confident, promising quick profits and huge returns. Investors poured money into their venture, believing the hype. Bakari was so caught up in the fame, he didn't bother to ask questions. Then one day, his partner disappeared. Phone off, office empty, bank account cleaned out. Investors started demanding answers, and Bakari had none. The money was gone, just like that. The calls turned into threats. The praises turned into insults. People who once begged to be close to him now avoided him like a curse. But the worst was yet to come. When the money vanished, so did Achieng. She didn't even pretend to stay. She blocked his number, unfollowed him on socials, and moved on with another rich man like nothing had ever happened. Bakari was left with empty pockets and a broken heart, realizing too late that he had traded something real for something fake. As if that pain wasn't enough, Bakari began to feel constantly tired. At first, he thought it was stress. Then came the nausea, the dizziness, the dark circles under his eyes. One morning, he collapsed in his bathroom. A neighbor rushed him to the hospital, where doctors ran tests and gave him news that shattered his world. Kidney failure. He needed long-term treatment, maybe even a transplant. Without it, things would only get worse. He lay in that hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking of everyone he once knew. He called his old friends. None picked up. He messaged Achieng. She left him on scene. He reached out to his family, but they were tired of his pride, tired of the show-off who never listened. Alone, sick, and broke, Bakari started to feel the weight of everything he had lost. He had chased image over substance, pride over love. Now he had nothing. There was one name that kept echoing in his mind. Zanele, the woman he had embarrassed, the one who stood by him when he had nothing. He hadn't thought of her in months, but now, in this lonely hospital room, her name felt like hope. He didn't know where she was, or if she'd even speak to him, but for the first time, Bakari saw the truth clearly. He had let go of gold for glitter, and glitter doesn't stay when the lights go out. Fate has a strange way of bringing people back together, especially when life humbles you. Bakari, now weak and frail, was wheeled into the emergency ward of a busy government hospital. He didn't know where he was. He just knew he was in pain and tired. His kidneys were failing fast, and the nurses whispered about how bad his condition looked. Alone, broke, and frightened, Bakari was no longer the confident man who once lit up parties. He was now a patient, clinging to hope. In the middle of all the commotion, the head nurse was called to review his case. She walked in wearing her crisp white uniform, clipboard in hand, calm but firm in her steps. It was Zanele, the very same woman he had once humiliated in front of a crowd, the woman whose body he mocked, whose love he threw away. Time had only made her stronger, her confidence now quiet and powerful. Her face looked the same, kind but unreadable. When their eyes met, Bakari's heart sank. He turned away quickly, ashamed, unable to speak. Zanele didn't flinch. She looked at him, her expression calm. No anger, no pity, just professionalism. She spoke to the junior nurses, gave instructions, and carried on with her work. She didn't say his name, didn't bring up the past, but inside Bakari was drowning in shame. He tried to avoid looking at her. He hated how helpless he looked in front of her. The woman he once said didn't fit his image. Now here she was, standing tall, strong, respected, while he was nothing more than a broken man in a hospital bed. His family, nowhere to be seen. They had grown tired of his arrogance and didn't believe his illness was serious. His so-called friends had vanished the moment his wallet dried up. No one came to visit. No one called to check. But Zanele showed up every morning, checking his vitals, adjusting his treatment plan, making sure he was stable. She didn't talk much, but her presence spoke volumes. She didn't have to help him, but she did, because that's who she was, a woman with a heart far bigger than the pain he caused her. One day, he tried to apologize, his voice barely a whisper, but the words stuck in his throat. Zanele only nodded, wrote down notes on his chart, and said, "Rest. You need your strength." That was it. No drama, no revenge, just grace. Bakari lay there in silence after she walked out, his chest heavy, not just from the illness but from regret. He saw now what he was too blind to see before. Real love had nothing to do with the perfect body or flashy clothes. It looked like Zanele. It acted like Zanele. And maybe, just maybe, this hospital bed was the only place he'd truly learn that lesson. Zanele could have walked away. She had every reason to. After everything Bakari put her through, the shame, the public humiliation, the cruel words, no one would have blamed her if she had ignored him completely. But that wasn't who Zanele was. She didn't carry hate in her heart. When she saw him lying weak and pale in the hospital bed, something inside her softened. He looked nothing like the confident, image-obsessed man who once broke her heart. Now he was just a man, alone, scared, and sick. And she was no longer the heartbroken girl he abandoned. She was a strong, respected nurse who had found her purpose beyond pain. At first, Bakari avoided her gaze. Shame wrapped around him like a blanket. He couldn't look at the woman he had once rejected for not being good enough. But Zanele didn't bring up the past. She didn't remind him of how he left her for Achieng. She didn't mention the party or the cruel things he'd said. She simply did her job with quiet dignity and care. She checked his vitals, managed his meds, and even adjusted his pillow when he struggled to move. It wasn't pity. It was compassion. It was strength. One afternoon, Zanele noticed that Bakari's treatment was delayed due to a gap in his insurance. The hospital was slow to act, and most nurses would have just followed procedure. But not Zanele. She used her influence as head nurse to fast-track his access to subsidized care. She even made a few phone calls to a local non-profit that helped patients with long-term illnesses. Her colleagues were shocked. "Why would you help him after everything he did to you?" one whispered. Zanele just smiled and said, "Because his actions don't define who I am." Bakari watched all this in silence, his pride slowly melting into regret. Every gesture, every kind word, every moment she stood by his side reminded him of what he had once thrown away. He had chased beauty, image, and surface-level thrill. But here was Zanele, his ex-girlfriend, the woman he once belittled, showing him what real love looked like. It wasn't in the hips or the waistline. It wasn't in flashy clothes or loud laughter at a party. It was in the quiet hands that cared for him, the eyes that held no hate, the heart that still knew how to forgive. And for the first time in a long while, Bakari wept, not from pain, but from realization. The hospital was quiet that evening. The hallway lights were dim, and the steady beeping of machines filled the silence. Zanele had just finished her rounds when she stepped into Bakari's room to check his vitals. He was sitting up weakly, his hands trembling slightly as he fidgeted with the blanket. There was something different in his eyes. Not pride, not shame, but a kind of raw honesty that hadn't been there before. He looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in years, and his lips trembled. "Zanele," he said softly, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry." The words hung in the air, fragile and heavy. He swallowed hard and tears rolled down his cheeks. "I was so wrong. You were always there for me. You believed in me, helped me when I had nothing, and I left you for someone who vanished the moment things got hard. I don't know why you're still here. I don't deserve it." Zanele didn't rush to respond. She just stood there looking at the man who had once broken her heart so publicly. She had imagined this moment before, maybe years ago, when the pain was fresh. Back then, she would have wanted to scream or walk away, but now all she felt was peace. She walked closer, sat beside him, and gently placed her hand over his. "You didn't love me, Bakari," she said in a calm, clear voice. "You loved an image, an idea of what you thought your future should look like. But I loved a soul. I saw your struggles, your dreams, your fears. I gave my heart to the real you, not the one you were trying to impress the world with." Bakari's tears came faster. He nodded slowly, as if each word unlocked another truth he had tried to hide from. "I see it now," he whispered. "Too late, but I see it." Zanele didn't respond with a dramatic speech. She didn't gloat or remind him of his cruelty. She didn't need to. Her silence was filled with grace. She reached over and wiped a tear from his cheek, like it was nothing, like they were just two people sitting in a room filled with past mistakes and hard-earned lessons. There was no romantic music, no promise of getting back together, just a quiet conversation between two souls, one learning humility, the other choosing healing over hate, and somehow that moment was more powerful than any revenge. Time passed, and Zanele continued to rise like the morning sun, quietly, gently, but powerfully. Her clinic, once just a small room in honor of her grandmother, had grown into a sanctuary for many. It wasn't just about medicine anymore. It became a place where women came not only to heal their bodies, but to rebuild their confidence, their dreams, and their sense of worth. Zanele started a new program there, one focused on self-esteem, body image, and emotional wellness. She spoke from experience, not from books. Women listened because they saw truth in her journey. Word spread across Nairobi. People began calling her Mama Moyo, Mother of Hearts, because of the way she restored not just health, but hope. She was no longer just the kind nurse. She had become a leader, a light, and a voice for the unheard. Meanwhile, Bakari slowly recovered. The once flashy man who had built his image around status and appearances had changed. Pain had humbled him, loneliness had taught him, and Zanele's mercy had opened his eyes. After his discharge, he asked if he could volunteer at her clinic. At first, people were surprised, but Zanele simply said, "Everyone deserves a second chance if they're ready to learn." Bakari didn't ask for pity. He swept floors, carried supplies, filed documents, whatever was needed. He sat in the background during the self-esteem sessions, listening silently. He saw women cry over words that had been thrown at them, fat, ugly, worthless, and he flinched, remembering how he had once said those same things to Zanele. But week by week, Bakari changed from a man of regrets to a man of purpose. He used his past mistakes to educate young men about respect and compassion. He stopped chasing image and started serving truth. Zanele never expected him to make up for the past. That wasn't her goal. Her light didn't depend on who saw it. It just shined. And in that light, Bakari found something he never had before: peace. As the story closes, a soft voice says, "In life, storms will come. People will walk away. But the ones who stay with you in the rain, who wipe your tears without needing applause, those are the ones worth standing beside when the sun finally shines." If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful life lessons. True love is not about looks or status. It's about soul, kindness, and who stays when everything falls apart.